Pay close attention. What you're about to see is Bible prophecy being fulfilled.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you news as it relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yeshua Hawkins. Well, we've got a battle for Libyan oil. Russia, China, and the U.S. kind of at odds again as Russia and China have just conducted some recent military exercises. Right. And, of course, what the U.S. is doing to prepare for war, more building up of the troops and, as a result, more money being spent in the process. That's right. But first, we're going to start off with Libya. 7 years since the Libyan uprising, that country is still torn by a battle for influence and dominance. Warlords, rival governments, street gang fightings, it's just all-out chaos there. And recently, prisoners just broke out of jail to add to the turmoil. Now, the capital, Tripoli, isn't a safe place right now. Now, Europe is worried, saying that there's a lot at stake with migrants, terrorism, and of course, lots of oil, lots and lots of oil. They also warned against further escalation. The ambassadors of France, Italy, the UK, and the US said those who undermine Libya's peace, security, and stability will be held responsible.
Well, France and Italy seem to be competing over Libya. Now, French President Macron recently held a peace summit calling for an election. France wants an election held in September, while Italy is in no rush for it to be held anytime this year. Now, why, you might ask? Well, the Italian oil company Eni is pumping over 300,000 barrels of oil a day in Libya, the equivalent of $25 million a day in revenue, while the French oil company Total is only pumping about 31,500 barrels of oil a day. So their slice of the oil pie is much smaller in comparison to Italy's.
Interesting. Well, the French foreign minister to Libya wants a strong military built there, of course, led by General Haftar, who currently leads the alternative Libyan government and holds sway over half the population of Libya. He also has an army in place and controls a large amount of oil reserves. But since he isn't recognized internationally, he technically can't sell that oil, and that's why the French can't drill there unless he wins the election, which is why they're really pushing for an election there in Libya, which, of course, they're pushing for this, and they're hoping that as a result of this election, that it'll kind of push the Italian oil company Eni out of that oil market in Libya.
Well, oddly enough, Catan, Italy and French were the loudest people there in the room calling for the overthrow of Gaddafi. Now, that reason there became more apparent as they vie for their share of oil.
Yeah, it wasn't particularly the man, but what was underneath the ground there.
What it was about.
That's sad. Well, Turkish President Erdogan is blaming the United States for an economic attack against its country. He said that Turkey would see the results of the Turkish bank's independence after a large interest rate increase. He also called on Turks to convert their savings into lira and encouraged them to not give up on production and investment. The Turkish Central Bank raised rates by 6.25% to fight soaring inflation and boost the lira, which plunged over 40% after sanctions imposed by the United States on Turkey over a detained American pastor.
Well, the Syrian war has displaced millions of people, but since January and July of this year, over 1 million men, women, and children in 6 major battles area-wide have been forced out of their homes. Now, the current offensive in Idlib could trigger a massive exodus. Paulo Pinheiro, the UN Inquiry Commission chairperson on Syria, said to a panel that there's nothing wrong with fighting against terrorists, but something has to be done to protect the rights of 3 million people and 1 million children.
Hani Magali of the same commission said that if Idlib goes the same way as we've seen in other places, then it's a complete failure on the international system. The UN Commission blames all sides of the conflict for violations. The Commission hopes to bring to justice those responsible for violations against human rights when the fighting is over. Now, fears of an imminent assault in Idlib has the UN worrying about an even larger humanitarian crisis. And of course, the whole focus now is Idlib because that's the stronghold after the militants were ousted out of those other areas. They kind of took up residence there in Idlib, and now the whole target of the forces and the fighting is there. And so now they're kind of wondering, you know, how bad this is going to be, but they're expecting it to be pretty bad.
Well, we're now going to go to our field correspondent, Larry McGee, who has been covering the largest Russian military exercise to date. Over 300,000 Russian forces are gathered there for these war games, but also they have someone joining them that is not too familiar in their war games, but that is China, who sent a certain number of troops over there. Larry, what can you tell us about Russia's largest military exercise and China joining them?
The largest competitors to American hegemony combined forces in another show of strength this week, conducting a joint military drill that was purportedly designed to test the combat readiness of troops in adverse environments. The conjoined maneuvers between China and Russia are reportedly being conducted in eastern Russia, close to the Chinese border, with Mongolia reportedly participating as well. The exercise is said to be one of the largest in Russia's recent history, and it comes at a time of heightened tensions between Moscow and NATO. Team West, or the U.S. and its allies, are reported to be paying close attention. Meanwhile, Beijing is attending to itself, battening down and attempting to tighten any loose screws. Here's a video showing the intensity of naval developments in China.
Sailing in the South China Sea, more than 50 warships from the PLA Navy have been conducting one of its largest military drills. The multi-program sessions include the aircraft carrier Liaoning with warships and fighters from the North, East and South Sea fleets. The blue water training is now routine.
This live fire drill has boosted our tactics and skills.
This is a new test in combat capabilities for the Liaoning. Many say it's a higher level for the PLA naval transformation.
The aircraft carrier can fundamentally change the structure of naval forces. It can form a battle group with frigates, amphibious fleets and submarines. This reveals the direction of the PLA naval development in line with maritime powers.
Training has been intensified, especially for joint operational missions. Military expert Yin Xiaoyang says unlike many other navies that focus on enhancing their multiple roles like anti-terrorism and ballistic missile interception, the Chinese Navy focuses on winning a maritime conflict.
Well, in the past 5 years, the PLA Navy has been on a rapid building and acquisition program. More than a dozen new classes of ships have been designed and built, and over 30 brand new warships have been gone into service. The Navy's priority is heading to the Blue Water Sea and breaking the choke points of the first and second island chains. The strategy is to expand its naval capabilities to protect territorial waters, and deal with security threats.
Experts say the PLA Navy, under President Xi Jinping's direction, will step up blue water training and equipment upgrading. Its modernization process will continue to speed up, but the actual capabilities have yet to be tested.
The rapid change in naval forces is a reflection of the PLA's overall transformation aimed at leaner and smarter armed forces that are able to win a war.
With the newly equipped aircraft carrier and fighting ships, The Navy has been transformed into PLA's main combat force, playing a greater role in the future. The destroyers and the frigates become the most important warships. For instance, the destroyers are equipped with long-range air defense missiles and vertical launching system and active-phased digital array radar for searching and targeting.
Most Chinese believe the growing number of advanced warships are a symbol of a stronger navy and the hopes of becoming a major maritime power are setting sail.
Every war has its political front, and amid efforts to strengthen itself militarily, Russia is also voicing concern over what many believe is an effort on behalf of the U.S. to prepare the public for another strike against Syria. There is a strong belief among America's opponents that the U.S., through propaganda, is setting the stage for a false flag chemical attack that will create a facade of legitimacy for the U.S. and its cronies to launch another attack against the administration of President Assad. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Katan Jeff, back to you.
Well, it's got to definitely have the United States at the edge of its seat with China and Russia joining forces, and of course, with all the reports about the false flags of the Syrian chemical attacks. Right. You know, really, with the international community, I wonder how a lot of people are looking at the U.S., but at the same time, the U.S. has its eyes on war. So it's got to create a lot of tension in an international community, not only for the leaders, but also for the citizens who usually end up getting the brunt of all of the actions of the leaders.
Right, and especially when you see China and Russia teaming up, both very strong militarily, right. That would be a very tough fight for the U.S.
No doubt, no doubt. Well, it has been 17 years since the 9/11 attacks in the United States and the realization that terrorism was no longer taking place only in far-off countries. Al-Qaeda became known as the epitome of evil in every household in America, and our president at the time, George W. Bush, was against all terrorist groups and anyone who supported them, but on the side of the Muslim people. In one address, he was quoted as saying, "The United States is an enemy of those who aid terrorists and of the barbaric criminals who profane a great religion by committing murder in its name."
But that was 17 years ago, and the war on terrorism has focused on different groups, especially ISIS, over the recent years. But terrorism has not been brought to an end, and it's getting harder to know who's fighting who. Now, Al-Qaeda now goes by the name Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, and this group is alive and thriving in Syria today.
The UN is reporting there are currently more than 10,000 fighters in Syria who have ties to Al-Qaeda. For a long time now, the United States has been promising to separate what they call the moderate opposition from the designated terrorist groups, but they haven't followed through on that promise. In fact, it seems like the U.S. is more focused on sounding the alarm that the Syrian government is trying to regain rebel-held territories.
President Donald Trump tweeted in September, "President Bashar al-Assad of Syria must not recklessly attack Idlib province." However, the U.S. government did not stop there. The U.S. ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, said, "If there are chemical weapons that are used, we know who's going to use them," implying that only the Assad government would do such a thing.
Interesting. National Security Advisor John Bolton rejects the idea that anybody but the Syrian government might use chemical weapons. When the government of Russia and others said that the U.S. was giving the authorization for Al-Qaeda to use chemical weapons and try and pin it on the government of Syria, Mr. Bolton said that was one of the most outrageous claims he could think of.
Well, the UN Special Envoy disagrees with the U.S.'s position and said the terrorists are very capable of conducting chemical attacks. Stefan de Mistura made this statement. The government, on one hand, and al-Nusra, which is an organization declared terrorist by this council, are having the capability to produce weaponized chlorine.
Now, senior analyst Alessandro Bruno told RT News, "It quickly stopped being a war about democracy. There is no distinction, and I think the United States knows this. It didn't matter to the United States who won so long as Assad lost." The Americans are looking for a way to stop the Syrian and Russian advance on Idlib and prevent this conflict from being over. The Syrian government will be responsible for chemical attacks regardless of who does them.
Well, this change in U.S. foreign policy is not new. In the 1980s, Osama bin Laden was called a freedom fighter when he was battling against the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan. The CIA gave him guns and the U.S. media praised him. However, years later, bin Laden became a bitter enemy to the U.S. Now the situation with al-Qaeda seems to be doing the same thing, only this time in reverse.
Well, Air Force Secretary Heather Wilson called for more squadrons to prepare for possible war against China and Russia. The goal of having 386 squadrons by the year 2030, up from the 312 operating today, is to meet the demands on the National Defense Strategy unveiled by the Pentagon at the beginning of the year.
At the Air Force's Air, Space, and Cyber Conference in Washington, D.C., Heather Wilson said, "We must see the world as it is. That is why the National Defense Strategy explicitly recognizes that we have returned to an era of great power competition. We must prepare," she said. Now, the 24% increase would prepare the Air Force for a possible conflict with major powers, China and Russia. And as we just mentioned, Katan, both these countries just got finished participating in the joint military exercise, and that would strongly suggest that they have a military alliance forming between these two strong countries.
That's right. Well, the taxpayer bill for such a hike would be a whopping $49.9 billion and an additional $13 billion per year in operating costs. Despite the increase in spending, a 2017 RAND Corporation report says that, quote, "Put more starkly, assessments in this report will show that U.S. forces could, under plausible assumptions, lose the next war they are called upon to fight, despite the United States outspending China military forces by a ratio of 2.7 to 1 and Russia by 6 to 1.
Wow.
Yeah.
Those are quite the difference there in spending.
That's right.
Well, as we see all the war games taking place here, we see also the U.S. realizing that they need to do some more preparing themselves. The world is getting ready to have in New York the 73rd UN General Assembly meeting there, and that is where President Donald Trump plans to unveil his Mideast peace plan. And remember, he's made the statement that if this plan fails, he believes that no other peace plan is going to be able to work. So interesting that as all the wars are getting, or the increase, the buildup of wars taking place, the peace plan is still trying to be pushed through in the Middle East. And of course, that is something that Yeshua Hawkins has been mentioning for years, that would be at this very same time period when there are great wars that would eventually go to the nuclear wars. They would be restarting this last portion of this Middle East peace plan.
That's right. And of course, many of his predecessors have tried to kind of get this peace plan starting to take effect again. Of course, Bill Clinton was the one who was there and kind of the instigator for the signing of it back in 1993, which they signed it in September 1993 and of course took effect in October of 1993. But in the process of that, since 1993 all the way up to the election of President Trump, it's just been a lot of back and forth talks and negotiating over the table. Interestingly enough, one of the things that were kind of hotly contested that Trump seemed to really just grab the bull by the horns was moving the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, as well as recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
Right, and that being shut down for 21 years, and as you mentioned, a lot of people have tried over the years to, or attempted to get it restarted without success. So be very interesting to see if Donald Trump here, President Donald Trump, is able to make things work.
That's right. Well, if you'd like to learn more about these last days prophecies and what is going to take place as a result of mankind's activities, contact the House of Yahweh. And when you do, don't forget to request your free copies of the monthly newsletter and the Prophetic Word magazine. Here's how. To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. Or you can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites by going to Yahweh.com, YisraelHawkins.com, or Yahweh'sBranch.com. You can also visit our website by going to YPNnews.com. You can also email the House of Yahweh at info@yahweh.com. And for all calls outside the United States, please dial the number on your screen. And don't forget the Yisrael Says and the Ask Yisrael program, totally free programs available online to aid you in studying the Holy Scriptures and understanding prophecies for this time period. You can find those programs free, again, online by going to YisraelSays.com and AskYisrael.com.
Well, don't go anywhere. Up next is another message from Yisrael Hawkins that you do not want to miss. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
And I'm Katan Alexander.
Thanks for watching.